1971 and 72 were very tumultuous years. As a nation, we were still reeling from the assassinations of JFK, Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy when Governor George Wallace was shot. We were bleeding from the open wound of the war in Vietnam and still grieving mournfully in shock over the massacre at Kent State, when the New York Times published a leaked copy of the Pentagon Papers, giving all of America hard evidence that this government of the people, by the people, and for the people had been lying to the people since World War II. And the threat of Soviet brand communism loomed over us. It seemed to be breathing down our neck as it was gaining a foothold in Southeast Asia and growing stronger in Eastern Europe. And with it, the fear, the very real fear of a nuclear holocaust and a Cold War that kept getting hotter. And it wasn't just here at home. Bombs were bursting all over Northern Ireland. On one day, 22 bombs exploded in Belfast alone. And on another day, Bloody Sunday, 14 unarmed Christian protesters were gunned down and killed by British forces. And at the 72 Olympics, the Olympics, an event that should rise above all of that and hopefully bring the world together, Palestinian terrorists breached Olympic Village security and killed 11 Israeli athletes. It was a time of great angst and fear. There was a sense that the social order was completely crumbling around us, that total anarchy was the wolf knocking at the door. And in the midst of this, right in the midst of this, on January 1st, 1972, the World Day for Peace, Pope Paul VI, who himself had inherited a church that was strained under the struggle and the weight of a great change. The most compressed, significant change in the church's 2,000-year history. And dealing with all of that, in the middle of that, Pope Paul VI addressed the world and gave us these very famous words: if you want peace, work for justice. If you want peace, work for justice. And I've always been fascinated by his verb choice. There were a lot of verbs he could have used instead that would have been completely acceptable and also to some degree inspiring. He could have said, if you want peace, pray for justice, promote justice, pursue justice. He could have told us to vote for justice or even fight for justice. But instead he chose to say, if you want peace, work for justice. And I think that word work is powerfully poignant for all of us, because with work comes three very important commitments. For our faith to work, it must be active. Work is active. Work is constructive. And work is personal. So let's look at those briefly. First, the idea that a working faith is active. St. James wrote that faith without action is dead. It's empty. It's meaningless. He likened it to a man looking at his own reflection in a mirror, and you see it when you're looking at it, but as soon as you turn away, it disappears. It's gone. Faith is an active faith, and we must work in an active way. This past week, we dedicated the Hope Center downtown, collaborative effort by a number of West Side parishes, including our own. And representatives and people from our parish worked very hard, took action, invested themselves, their time, their energy, their resources into bringing justice to the hungry by creating greater access to St. Pat's Pantry and bringing justice to infants and their moms through Love Life Ministry. The Hope Center stands as a great example of a working faith in action. Secondly, a working faith is constructive. It builds something. So much of the energy in our world today, and I don't mean our world out there, I mean the close, immediate world, in our own hearts, our own families, our own table conversations, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, so much of the energy that we are expending and putting into the world is negative. It's tearing down, it's condemning, it's complaining, it's destroying, there's all of this energy that is working in a destructive way. But a working faith is constructive. It builds. In terms of the carpenter's son, to work is to build something. And third, a working faith is personal. It requires not only something from us, but something of us. Our own sweat, our own time and energy and effort. Do you love me? Jesus asks Peter. Well, yes, Lord, of course, you know I love you. Peter responds, then feed my lambs, tend my sheep. In other words, get to work. That's what love is. That's what it looks like to get out there yourself and do something meaningful. One of the risks of a representative democracy is we are easily lulled into discipleship by proxy. We start to think and believe that by voting for the right person who represents the right policies and programs, we are doing our part. That alone, that we can, through the electoral process, create justice in the world without ever having to roll up our own sleeves and get our own hands dirty. But that's not what a working faith is. A working faith requires something of us personally to go out, feed my lambs, tend my sheep. Now, not everyone is able to work for justice. The elderly, the sick, they're caregivers who are just so weary and exhausted in their own right from working for justice for another person. The mentally ill, victims of abuse, human trafficking, children, the unborn. All of these people are not able to work for justice. And they're all in need of justice. So the rest of us who are able need to double our efforts. We need to work twice as hard for justice on their behalf. And yes, sometimes it's exhausting. And yes, sometimes we grow weary and tired and need to be refreshed, but we shall never give up. We must work for justice. Christianity is a working faith. Whatever you do for the least, Jesus says, you do for me. Our offering is the fruit of the vine and the work of human hands. What work do we bring and offer? Do this in memory of me. Break yourself open. Pour yourself out. Do this in memory of me. So yes, our world is a chaotic and dangerous place. But that's not new. It wasn't new in 1971 or in 1941 or in 1861 or even in the year 31. It wasn't new. And we can't be disciples by proxy. We can't abdicate our own culpability and responsibility or hide behind our prayer or our Facebook posts or even our vote. We are called to a working faith. If you want peace, and who among us doesn't? Who among us doesn't want peace? If you want peace, work for justice.